The dusty street of Durango, Colorado seemed to hold its breath as Natalie Porter stepped out of the boarding house for what might be the last time, her hands trembling as she clutched the notice that had been delivered 3 days ago by Sheriff Morton himself. The letter stated in cold, formal language that she had exactly 7 days from receipt to vacate the town limits, or face arrest for the crime of being a woman alone without proper sponsorship. A law recently enacted by the town council to discourage what they called undesirable elements from taking root in their growing community. It was September 1878, and the autumn sun beat down mercilessly on the dirt roads where wagons creaked past, and men in worn boots tipped their hats without meeting her eyes, as if acknowledging her would somehow taint them by association. Natalie had arrived in Durango 6 months earlier with dreams of starting fresh after her father's death back in St. Louis. Using the small inheritance he left to open a seamstress shop that had been slowly building a modest clientele among the respectable women of the town. Those same women now crossed the street when they saw her coming, their faces pinched with disapproval and something else that looked uncomfortably like fear, as though her predicament might somehow be contagious. The truth was simpler and more vicious than any disease. Cornelius Grayson, the wealthiest rancher in the area, had decided he wanted the building where her shop stood for his own purposes, and when she refused to sell at his insulting offer, he had convinced the town council to create this new ordinance specifically to force her out. She walked down Main Street with her head held high despite the burning sensation behind her eyes, passing the general store where old Mr. Henderson pretended to be deeply invested in rearranging his window display, and the saloon where piano music drifted out into the afternoon air along with the smell of whiskey and tobacco. The marshal's office stood on the corner, its door open to catch whatever breeze might come through, and she could see Sheriff Morton inside, his boots propped on his desk as he read through a stack of wanted posters with studied concentration. He had been apologetic when delivering the notice, but not apologetic enough to actually do anything about the injustice of it all, and she had learned quickly that sympathy without action was worth less than nothing in this harsh land. Her destination was the bank, where she hoped to withdraw what remained of her savings before leaving town, though even that simple transaction had become complicated by her new pariah status. The bank manager, a nervous man named Whitmore who sweated through his collar even in winter, had suggested just yesterday that it might be better if she conducted her business elsewhere, though there was no other bank for 50 miles in any direction. She pushed through the heavy door and immediately felt the temperature drop several degrees in the stone building, her eyes adjusting to the dimmer light as she approached the teller window. Before she could speak, a commotion erupted behind her as the door swung open again with enough force to bang against the wall. She turned to see a man she had noticed around town but never formally met, someone the other women whispered about with a mixture of disapproval and fascination. His name was Wesley Bryant, and he owned a small ranch on the outskirts of town that he worked mostly by himself, appearing in Durango only when necessary to sell cattle or purchase supplies. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and dark brown hair that needed cutting, wearing the practical clothes of a working rancher rather than the fancy embroidered shirts some of the wealthier cattlemen favored. Wesley walked straight to the teller window where Natalie stood frozen, his boots loud on the wooden floor, and when he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the hushed space. "I need to speak with Miss Porter immediately on a matter of urgent business." The words were polite enough, but something in his tone suggested he would not be easily dismissed, and Natalie felt her heart begin to race with a confusing mixture of apprehension and something else she could not quite name. The teller, A young man named Douglas, who had always been kind to her before the notice, looked between them with obvious uncertainty before gesturing vaguely toward the corner of the room. "You can speak over there, I suppose, though Miss Porter was conducting business." "This will only take a moment," Wesley said. But he was already turning toward Natalie with an intensity in his gray-blue eyes that made her feel like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. He led her to the corner he had indicated, far enough from the teller that they could speak without being easily overheard, though she was acutely aware that every person in the bank was watching them with undisguised curiosity. When he spoke, his words came out in a low rush that suggested he had been rehearsing them. "Miss Porter, I know we have not been properly introduced, and I know this will sound like madness, but I need you to hear me out before you say anything. I have a proposition that could solve both our problems, if you are willing to consider something unconventional." Natalie found her voice, though it came out shakier than she would have liked. "I was not aware you had any problems, Mr. Bryant, and I fail to see how my situation could possibly concern you." "That is where you are wrong," he said, and there was something almost fierce in his expression now. "Your situation concerns me a great deal, because what the town council did to you is wrong, and because I have been watching you for months now, wishing I had the courage to speak to you properly, and because I cannot stand by and watch them drive you out when there is something I can do about it." The words hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and making her head spin with confusion and a dangerous flutter of hope. "What are you talking about? What could you possibly do?" "The law is the law, no matter how unjust, and I have no sponsor and no husband and therefore no right to remain in Durango past the deadline." "That is exactly my point," Wesley said, and now he reached out as though to take her hand before stopping himself, his own hand dropping back to his side. "You need a husband. I need a wife. The solution seems clear enough if you can overlook the unorthodox nature of how I am proposing it." The world seemed to tilt sideways, and Natalie had to lock her knees to keep from swaying. "Are you seriously suggesting that we get married? We do not even know each other. This is insane." "Is it more insane than being forced to leave your home and your business because some rich rancher decided he wanted your building?" Wesley's voice had risen slightly, and he made a visible effort to control it, glancing around at their audience before continuing more quietly. "I know this is not how things are supposed to be done. I know I should court you properly, take you to church socials and ask your family for permission and all the rest of it. But you do not have time for any of that, and I will be honest with you, Miss Porter, I am not good at pretty words or social niceties anyway. What I am good at is hard work and keeping my promises, and I promise you that if you marry me, you can keep your shop and stay in Durango, and you will have a home and protection for as long as you need it." "But why?" The question came out as barely more than a whisper. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability appearing beneath the determined exterior. "Because you are not entirely a stranger to me, even if we have never spoken. I have been coming into town every week for the past 4 months, finding excuses to walk past your shop, watching you work through the window, and admiring the way you hold yourself, the way you are kind to everyone even when they do not deserve it. I have been trying to work up the nerve to introduce myself properly, but I am not comfortable in social situations, and every time I planned to speak to you, I would lose my courage. And then this happened, and I realized I had wasted all that time being afraid when I could have been getting to know you. And now you are being driven away, and I cannot let that happen without trying everything in my power to stop it." Natalie stared at him, her mind racing through the implications of what he was suggesting. It was madness, absolute madness, to marry a man she had never even had a conversation with before this moment. But what choice did she have? She could leave Durango and try to start over somewhere else, but she had no guarantee that the same thing would not happen again in the next town, and her savings would not last forever. At least here she had her shop and the beginnings of a life she had worked hard to build. And there was something in Wesley Bryant's eyes when he looked at her, something genuine and honest that made her want to believe he meant every word he was saying. "If I agreed to this," she said slowly, testing the words on her tongue, "what exactly would you expect from such a marriage?" "I need to know what I would be agreeing to." Wesley seemed to consider this carefully before answering. "I would expect honesty between us, and respect, and a genuine effort to make the arrangement work. I have a ranch that needs a woman's touch, and I would hope that eventually you might come to care for it and for me. But I would not force anything on you that you were not ready for. We could take time to get to know each other properly, even if we are doing it backwards from how most people do. You could keep your shop in town and come out to the ranch when you wanted, or you could stay at the ranch and visit the shop, whatever felt right to you. All I ask is that you give it a real chance and not just see it as a business arrangement." "And if it does not work?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "If we find we cannot stand each other?" "Then we will deal with that when and if it happens," Wesley said firmly. "But I do not think that will be the case. I think we could be good together, Miss Porter. I think we could build something real if we are both willing to try." The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence that followed, and Natalie became aware once again of the watching eyes, the whispered speculations. She thought about the notice folded in her pocket, about the deadline that was rushing toward her like a runaway train. She thought about her shop and the clients she had worked so hard to build trust with, about the small room at the boarding house that had started to feel almost like home. She thought about starting over somewhere else, alone and vulnerable to the same kind of manipulation that had brought her to this point. And she thought about Wesley Bryant, this near stranger who had just offered her salvation in the most unexpected way possible. "All right," she heard herself say, the words coming from somewhere deep inside her that was braver than she felt. "I will marry you, Mr. Bryant. But I want it understood that I am agreeing to this as a partnership, not as some kind of rescue where I am expected to be eternally grateful and subservient. If we do this, we do it as equals." The smile that broke across Wesley's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds, transforming his somewhat severe features into something almost boyish. "I would not want it any other way, Miss Porter. When should we do this?" "I know you have a week, but I was thinking maybe we should not wait. The sooner we are married, the sooner that notice becomes invalid." Natalie felt a laugh bubble up in her throat, slightly hysterical but genuine. "Are you suggesting we get married right now, this very day? Why not?" Wesley's eyes were bright with determination. "Judge Holloway is in his office across the street. We can get a license and have him perform the ceremony, and then you can go straight to Sheriff Morton and show him the marriage certificate. By sunset, you will be Mrs. Wesley Bryant, and there will not be a thing Cornelius Grayson or anyone else can do about it." The speed of it all made her dizzy, but there was also something exhilarating about the decisiveness of his plan. She had been living in a state of anxious limbo for 3 days, and the idea of resolving everything in a single afternoon was almost intoxicating. "All right then," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "Let us go get married, Mr. Bryant." They left the bank together, and Natalie was intensely aware of the stares that followed them, the way conversation died as they passed, and then erupted in excited whispers the moment they were out of earshot. Wesley walked beside her with his shoulders squared, not touching her, but somehow making it clear through his posture that she was under his protection now. They crossed the dusty street to Judge Holloway's office, a small building that also served as a law office when the judge was not presiding over cases. Judge Holloway was a portly man in his 60s with impressive gray whiskers and a shrewd gaze that seemed to take in everything at once. He looked up from the legal document he was reviewing as they entered, his eyebrows rising in surprise. "Mr. Bryant, Miss Porter, this is an unexpected combination. What can I do for you?" Wesley stepped forward, his hand moving unconsciously to rest lightly on the small of Natalie's back, a gesture of support that she found oddly comforting. "We need a marriage license, Judge, and we would like you to perform the ceremony today if possible." The judge set down his pen with deliberate care, leaning back in his chair with a creak of leather. "Today? That is rather sudden, is it not? Might I ask what has prompted this rush to the altar?" "I believe you know exactly what has prompted it, Judge," Wesley said, and there was an edge to his voice now. "Miss Porter received a notice to leave town, a notice based on a law that we both know was created specifically to target her. By marrying me, she gains the right to stay, and that is exactly what she is going to do." Judge Holloway studied them both for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed and pulled open a drawer in his desk, extracting the necessary forms. "I cannot say I approve of the circumstances that have brought you to this point, but I also cannot say I disagree with your solution. Cornelius Grayson has been overstepping his bounds for some time now, and the town council has been too willing to dance to his tune. If you are both certain this is what you want, I will perform the ceremony." "We are certain," Natalie said, speaking up for the first time since entering the office. Her voice was stronger now, more confident. "I am grateful for your concern, Judge Holloway, but Mr. Bryant and I have discussed this, and we are both entering into this marriage with our eyes open." The judge nodded slowly and began filling out the license, asking them the necessary questions about their ages, previous marital status, and places of birth. Natalie was 24 years old, had never been married, and had been born in St. Louis, Missouri. Wesley was 27, also never married, born right here in Colorado Territory before it had even become a state. The mundane questions helped ground her, reminding her that, despite the unusual circumstances, this was a real marriage they were entering into, with all the legal and personal implications that entailed. When the paperwork was complete, Judge Holloway stood and gestured for them to stand before his desk. "Do you have any witnesses? Legally, we need at least one." Wesley frowned, clearly not having thought of this detail. "No, we do not. Is there someone in the building who could serve?" "My clerk is out running errands, but I can step outside and see if anyone is available." The judge moved toward the door, but it opened before he reached it, revealing Sheriff Morton himself, looking surprised to find them all gathered there. "Judge, I need to speak with you about the Hutchinson case," the sheriff began, then stopped as he took in the scene before him. "What is going on here?" "Perfect timing, Sheriff," Judge Holloway said with a hint of dry humor. "I need a witness for a wedding ceremony." "Would you be willing to serve in that capacity?" Sheriff Morton's eyes widened as he looked between Wesley and Natalie, understanding dawning on his face. "You two are getting married, right now?" "Yes," Wesley said firmly. "Do you have a problem with that, Sheriff?" The sheriff removed his hat, running a hand through his graying hair. "No, no problem at all. In fact, I have to say I am rather relieved. That notice I delivered to Miss Porter has been sitting poorly with me ever since I had to hand it over. If this solves the situation, then I am happy to witness it." Judge Holloway cleared his throat, drawing their attention back to the matter at hand. "Very well then. Let us proceed." Wesley Bryant, do you take this woman, Natalie Porter, to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer in sickness and in health, until death do you part? Wesley turned to face Natalie fully, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. I do. And do you, Natalie Porter, take this man, Wesley Bryant, to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer in sickness and in health, until death do you part? This was it, the moment of no return. Once she spoke those words, her entire life would change in ways she could not begin to predict. But as she looked at Wesley, at the honest hope in his face and the solid steadiness of his presence, she felt a certainty settle over her that this was the right choice, no matter how unconventional. I do. Do you have rings? Judge Holloway asked. Wesley looked stricken for a moment, clearly having forgotten this detail in his rush to propose the marriage. But then his hand went to his vest pocket and he pulled out a simple gold band that was clearly worn and old. This was my mother's ring. She died when I was 12, and my father gave it to me before he passed 3 years ago. I have been carrying it with me ever since, not really knowing why. I would be honored if you would wear it, Natalie. The use of her first name sent a little shiver through her, a reminder that this man was now her husband, that they would share a life and a home and all the intimacy that came with marriage. She held out her left hand, trying to keep it steady, and watched as Wesley slid the ring onto her finger. It was slightly too large, spinning loosely around her finger, but the weight of it felt right somehow, a tangible symbol of the promise they had just made to each other. Then, by the power vested in me by the state of Colorado, I pronounce you husband and wife, Judge Holloway said. Wesley, you may kiss your bride. Natalie's heart hammered in her chest as Wesley stepped closer, his hands coming up to gently frame her face. His palms were rough and calloused from years of ranch work, but his touch was careful, almost reverent. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and when his lips met hers it was soft and brief, a gentle press that nonetheless sent warmth flooding through her entire body. When he pulled back, his eyes were full of wonder, as though he could not quite believe this was real. "Hello, wife," he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear. "Hello, husband," she whispered back, testing out the unfamiliar word. Judge Holloway cleared his throat again, bringing them back to the practical matters at hand. "I will file this license with the county clerk first thing tomorrow morning, but here is a signed copy for your records. I suggest you take it directly to whoever issued that notice and clear up any misunderstanding about Miss Porter's status in this town." "Mrs. Bryant," Wesley corrected gently, taking the certificate from the judge. "Her name is Mrs. Bryant now." They left the judge's office together, husband and wife, stepping out into the afternoon sunlight that seemed somehow brighter than it had been just an hour ago. Natalie felt like she was moving through a dream, everything slightly unreal and yet more vivid than ordinary life. Wesley's hand found hers, his fingers lacing through hers in a way that felt both strange and natural, and they walked together back toward the marshal's office where this whole impossible day had started. Sheriff Morton, who had left the judge's office just before them, was already back at his desk when they arrived. He looked up as they entered, and something like approval crossed his weathered face. "Mr. and Mrs. Bryant, I have to say, that was the quickest wedding I have ever witnessed." "What can I do for you?" Wesley placed the marriage certificate on the desk with a decisive thump. "You can take back that notice you gave my wife. As a married woman with a proper husband, she has every right to remain in Durango, and I will thank you to make sure that everyone knows it, especially Cornelius Grayson." The sheriff picked up the certificate, examining it carefully, then reached into his desk drawer and pulled out the original notice. With deliberate ceremony, he tore it in half, then in half again, dropping the pieces into the waste basket beside his desk. "Consider the matter resolved, Mrs. Bryant. You are free to remain in Durango for as long as you like. And Mr. Bryant, you might want to know that Cornelius Grayson was in here just this morning asking when Miss Porter would be leaving. I suspect he will not be pleased by this development." "I suspect you are right," Wesley said with grim satisfaction. "And I suspect he will have something to say about it, but there is nothing he can do now. The law is the law, as he is so fond of reminding people when it suits his purposes." They left the marshal's office and stood together on the wooden sidewalk, the reality of what they had just done beginning to sink in. Natalie realized she had no idea what happened next, whether she was expected to go to Wesley's ranch immediately or if she should return to her boarding house and pack her belongings. The practical details of merging two separate lives suddenly seemed overwhelming. Wesley seemed to sense her uncertainty because he squeezed her hand gently. "I know this is all happening very fast. Why don't we go get some dinner at the hotel restaurant and talk about what comes next? You must have 100 questions, and I want to make sure we are on the same page about everything." The suggestion was so reasonable and considerate that Natalie felt some of her anxiety ease. "That sounds good. I am not sure I can eat anything with how nervous I am, but sitting down and talking would help." They walked to the hotel, which had the only proper restaurant in Durango, a place where the wealthy ranchers and businessmen took their meals. Natalie had never eaten there, unable to justify the expense, and she felt self-conscious as they entered the dining room with its white tablecloths and gleaming silverware. But Wesley led her to a table by the window without any apparent discomfort, pulling out her chair before seating himself across from her. The waiter approached with menus, his expression professionally neutral, though Natalie noticed the way his eyes flickered to her left hand, where her mother's ring caught the light. News traveled fast in a small town, and she had no doubt that by morning everyone in Durango would know that she had married Wesley Bryant. They ordered coffee and the roast beef special, and once the waiter had left them alone, Wesley leaned forward across the table. "Tell me about your shop. What kind of work do you do?" The question surprised her, both because it was so ordinary and because he seemed genuinely interested. She found herself relaxing slightly as she described her seamstress work, the satisfaction of creating beautiful garments and the challenge of working with difficult fabrics and demanding clients. Wesley listened attentively, asking questions that showed he was really paying attention, and gradually the conversation began to flow more naturally between them. "What about your ranch?" she asked eventually. "How long have you had it?" "My father started it about 20 years ago when this area was still wild and unsettled," Wesley explained. "He built it up from nothing, just him and my mother and eventually me when I got old enough to help. When he died, he left it all to me, about 500 acres and 100 head of cattle. It is not the biggest spread around, but it is good land with reliable water, and I have been slowly building the herd back up after selling off a lot of stock to pay for my father's medical care before he passed." "That must have been difficult, losing both your parents," Natalie said softly. "It was, but they taught me everything I know about ranching and about being a decent person. My mother especially was insistent that just because we lived out in rough country did not mean we had to be rough people. She would have liked you, I think. She believed in women being strong and capable, not just ornamental." The food arrived then, interrupting the conversation, and they ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Natalie discovered that, despite her earlier certainty that she could not eat, she was actually quite hungry, and the roast beef was tender and flavorful. She was halfway through her meal when a shadow fell across their table. She looked up to find Cornelius Grayson standing there, his expensive suit and polished boots a sharp contrast to Wesley's practical rancher's clothes. Grayson was in his 50s, with iron-gray hair and cold eyes that had always made Natalie uncomfortable. He looked at her now with barely concealed fury, his jaw tight with anger. "Miss Porter," he said, deliberately using her unmarried name. "I heard an interesting rumor just now. Surely it cannot be true that you married this nobody rancher just to avoid complying with the town's lawful ordinance." Before Natalie could respond, Wesley was on his feet, moving to stand between her and Grayson. "That is Mrs. Bryant to you, Grayson, and I would advise you to watch your tone when speaking to my wife." "This is absurd," Grayson snapped. "Everyone knows this is a sham marriage designed to circumvent the law. I will be speaking to the town council about it." "You do that," Wesley said, his voice deadly calm. "And while you are at it, you might want to explain to them why you pressured them into creating that ordinance in the first place. I am sure the good citizens of Durango would be very interested to know that their elected officials are in your pocket." Grayson's face flushed an ugly red. "You are making a very big mistake, Bryant. I own half this town, and I can make life very difficult for you and your little bride." "Is that a threat?" Wesley's hands had curled into fists at his sides, and Natalie could see the tension in his shoulders. "It is a statement of fact," Grayson said coldly. "You are way out of your depth here, boy. When you come crawling back to me begging for mercy, remember that I gave you a chance to back down." He turned and stalked out of the restaurant, leaving a wake of uncomfortable silence behind him. Wesley stood for a moment longer, visibly forcing himself to relax before sitting back down. His hands were shaking slightly as he picked up his coffee cup. "I am sorry about that," he said quietly. "I knew he would not be happy, but I did not expect him to confront us quite so publicly." "It is not your fault," Natalie said firmly. "He is the one who created this situation with his greed and manipulation. You did nothing wrong." "Maybe not, but I have definitely made an enemy today. Grayson is not the kind of man to forget a slight, and he will consider this a personal insult. We need to be careful." The warning sobered Natalie's momentary triumph. She had been so focused on solving her immediate problem that she had not fully considered the long-term consequences of defying someone as powerful as Cornelius Grayson. But it was too late to turn back now, and she found that she did not regret her choice, even knowing the potential cost. They finished their meal in more subdued spirits, and when they emerged from the restaurant, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Wesley turned to her with a question in his eyes. "I need to know what you want to do tonight. You can come out to the ranch with me, or I can rent you a room here at the hotel if you need more time to adjust to all this. I meant what I said earlier about not forcing anything on you. We can take this as slow as you need." Natalie considered her options. Part of her wanted the safety and familiarity of a hotel room, a chance to be alone and process everything that had happened. But another part of her, the part that had survived her father's death and built a business from nothing in a strange town, knew that delaying would only make things harder. If she was going to be Wesley's wife, she needed to start learning what that meant, and that started with seeing the place that would now be her home. "I want to see the ranch," she said decisively, "but I need to go to the boarding house first and collect my belongings. I have been paying weekly, so the landlady will not object to my leaving early. Of course. I will rent a wagon and meet you there in 30 minutes. That should give you time to pack." They parted ways on the street, and Natalie walked back to the boarding house with her mind whirling. Mrs. Henshaw, the landlady, was in the front parlor when Natalie entered, and her eyes went immediately to the ring on Natalie's finger. "So the rumors are true then," Mrs. Henshaw said, her voice carefully neutral. "You married Wesley Bryant?" "Yes, madam. This afternoon. I will be moving out to his ranch, so I wanted to settle my account with you." Mrs. Henshaw stood and moved to the small desk where she kept her account books. "You are paid through the end of the week, so there is nothing owed. I have to say, Miss Porter, Mrs. Bryant, I did not agree with what the town council did to you. It was not right, no matter what excuse they gave. I am glad you found a way to stay." The unexpected support brought tears to Natalie's eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Henshaw. That means more than you know." She hurried upstairs to her small room and began packing her belongings into the 2 trunks she had brought from St. Louis. It was not much, just clothes and a few personal items, some books that had belonged to her father, and the tools of her trade. Everything else she owned was at the shop, the sewing machines and fabric and half-finished garments that represented her livelihood. She would need to figure out how to manage both the shop and the ranch, but that was a problem for tomorrow. Wesley arrived right on schedule with a sturdy wagon and a patient-looking horse. He loaded her trunks into the back with easy strength, then helped her up onto the seat beside him. Mrs. Henshaw came out to wave goodbye, and then they were moving, the wagon creaking as they left Durango behind. The ranch was about 5 miles outside of town, following a road that wound through increasingly wild country. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still holding snow even in September, and the air smelled clean and sharp with pine and sage. Wesley kept up a running commentary as they drove, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the various neighbors, most of whom lived miles apart with huge stretches of empty land between them. As they crested a small rise, the ranch came into view, and Natalie felt her breath catch. It was beautiful in a stark, simple way, a sturdy 2-story house built of logs and stone with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Behind it stood a barn and several outbuildings, all well-maintained and neat. A stream ran through the property, its water catching the last of the evening light, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance, dark shapes against the golden grass. "It is not fancy," Wesley said, and there was uncertainty in his voice now. "But it is solid and the roof does not leak. I have been keeping it as clean as I can, but it has been a long time since there was a woman's touch in the house." "It is wonderful," Natalie said honestly. "I can see why you love it here." He smiled then, some of the tension leaving his shoulders, and drove the wagon up to the house. He helped her down and carried her trunks inside while she stood in the doorway, taking in her new home. The interior was as well kept as the exterior, with simple but solid furniture and colorful rugs on the wooden floors. The main room served as both kitchen and living space, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall and a sturdy table with 6 chairs in the center. Stairs led up to what she assumed were the bedrooms, and everything was clean and orderly in a way that suggested Wesley had been preparing for her arrival, even if he had not known exactly when it would happen. "Let me show you upstairs," Wesley said, gesturing toward the stairs. "There are 3 bedrooms. My room is at the front of the house, with the best view of the mountains. The other 2 are smaller, but one of them has good light, and I thought maybe you could use it for sewing if you wanted to work from home sometimes." He led her upstairs, and she peeked into each room as he described them. His bedroom was spare and masculine, with a large bed covered in a plain quilt and little else in the way of decoration. The room he suggested for sewing did indeed have excellent light from a large window, and she could already imagine setting up one of her sewing machines there. The 3rd bedroom was the smallest, currently empty except for a single dresser. Where should I sleep? Natalie asked, the question coming out more bluntly than she intended. Wesley met her eyes steadily. That is entirely up to you. You are welcome in my bed anytime you want to be there, but I will not push you. If you want to take one of the other rooms until you are more comfortable with all this, I understand completely. We have time to figure out what works for both of us. The answer was so perfectly considerate that Natalie felt a rush of warmth toward this man she had married. Could we maybe start with the separate rooms and see how things develop? This has all been so much so fast, and I think I need a little time to catch my breath. Of course. Take whichever room you prefer, and we will bring your trunks up. They spent the next hour getting her settled, carrying her belongings upstairs, and starting the process of making the sewing room into her temporary bedroom. Wesley found clean sheets and made up the bed while Natalie unpacked a few essentials, and the domestic cooperation of it felt oddly intimate despite the practical nature of the tasks. When everything was arranged to their satisfaction, they went back downstairs and Wesley made them coffee, measuring the grounds with careful precision, and adding just the right amount of water to the pot. They sat at the kitchen table, the silence between them comfortable now rather than awkward, and Natalie found herself studying her husband in the lamplight. He was handsome in a rough-hewn way, with strong features and those gray-blue eyes that seemed to see straight through her defenses. His hands wrapped around his coffee cup were large and capable, scarred from years of hard work, and she found herself wondering what it would feel like to have those hands touch her with tenderness. The thought made her blush, and she quickly looked away, focusing on her own coffee. "What are you thinking about?" Wesley asked softly. "Just trying to take it all in," Natalie said, which was true even if it was not the whole truth. "This morning I woke up facing exile from everything I had worked to build. Tonight I am sitting in a ranch house 5 miles from town, married to a man I barely know, trying to figure out how my life got so completely turned upside down in the span of a single day. You regret it?" The question was quiet, but she could hear the vulnerability beneath it. "No," Natalie said, and she was surprised to realize she meant it. "I am terrified and confused and completely overwhelmed, but I do not regret marrying you. You saved me today, Wesley, and I will never forget that. I just hope I can figure out how to be a good wife to you when I have no idea what I am doing." "You do not have to figure it out all at once," Wesley said, reaching across the table to cover her hand with his. "We will learn together. I have no idea how to be a good husband either, but I am willing to try if you are." "I am," Natalie said, turning her hand over so their palms met. "I definitely am." They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped on the table before Wesley reluctantly pulled away. "It is getting late, and I need to be up at dawn to tend to the cattle. You should get some rest. Tomorrow we can go into town and you can check on your shop, and we can start figuring out how to make this arrangement work for both of us." Natalie nodded and stood, suddenly exhausted now that the adrenaline of the day was wearing off. "That sounds good. Thank you, Wesley, for everything." "You do not need to thank me," he said, standing as well. "Now you are staying forever, remember, that is the deal we made." The words, echoed from what he had said outside the marshal's office, made her smile. "Yes, that is the deal. Forever." She went upstairs to her makeshift bedroom and changed into her nightgown, sliding between the unfamiliar sheets and staring up at the ceiling as she tried to process everything. She was married. She was Mrs. Wesley Bryant, wife to a rancher, living in a house 5 miles from town. It seemed impossible, and yet the ring on her finger was solid proof that it had really happened. Sleep was a long time coming, but when it finally arrived, it was deep and dreamless. the sleep of someone who had survived a crisis and lived to face whatever came next. The next few weeks passed in a blur of adjustment and discovery. Natalie fell into a routine of spending 3 days a week at her shop in town, working on the commissions she had already accepted and slowly winning back the clients who had abandoned her during the crisis. The other days she spent at the ranch, learning how to manage the household and beginning the process of truly making it her home. Wesley was patient and kind, giving her space when she needed it, but always ready to answer her questions or help with whatever she was working on. They talked for hours in the evenings, sharing stories about their pasts and their dreams for the future, and with each conversation, Natalie felt herself growing more comfortable with him, more willing to trust that this strange marriage might actually work. There were awkward moments, of course. The first time she accidentally walked in on him washing up after a day's work. Both of them had been mortified, though Wesley had laughed it off and teased her gently about needing to knock. The first time he saw her with her hair down, loose around her shoulders instead of pinned up properly, he had stared at her with such open admiration that she had blushed furiously. They were learning each other's rhythms and boundaries, figuring out how to share a space and a life. The attraction between them grew stronger with each passing day. Natalie found herself noticing things about Wesley that she had not paid attention to at first, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the deep rumble of his laugh, the gentleness with which he handled the horses and cattle. She caught him watching her sometimes with an intensity that made her pulse quicken, and more than once she had to resist the urge to close the distance between them and find out what it would be like to really kiss him. Not the brief, formal press of lips at their wedding, but something deeper and more passionate. It was about a month after their wedding when things finally shifted. They had gone into town together to pick up supplies, and Cornelius Grayson had made a point of confronting Wesley outside the general store, making thinly veiled threats about what would happen if Wesley did not convince Natalie to sell her shop building. Wesley had kept his temper admirably, but Natalie could see the strain in his jaw, the way his hands clenched at his sides. On the ride home, he was quieter than usual, and when they reached the ranch, he went straight to the barn without a word. Natalie put away the supplies and then followed him, finding him in one of the empty stalls with a pitchfork in his hands, attacking a pile of old hay with more force than was strictly necessary. "Wesley," she said softly from the doorway. He paused mid-swing, his shoulders slumping. "I am sorry. I needed to work off some anger before I said something I would regret." "You have nothing to apologize for. Grayson is the one who should be apologizing for the way he has treated both of us." Natalie stepped into the stall, moving closer to her husband. "Does he do that often?" "The threats, I mean. Often enough. He does not like that we defied him, and he especially does not like that other people are starting to notice that he has too much power around here. There have been some rumblings about replacing the town council with people who will not just do whatever Grayson wants, and he blames us for stirring that up." "Good," Natalie said fiercely. "He deserves to lose some of that power. What he did to me, what he has probably done to countless other people, it is not right." Wesley set down the pitchfork and turned to face her fully. "You are remarkable, you know that. Most women would have been terrified by what Grayson did today, but you just get angry and defiant. It is one of the things I admire most about you. I learned a long time ago that being afraid does not help anything," Natalie said. "My mother died when I was 10, and my father raised me by himself. He taught me that the world was not always kind to women, but that did not mean we had to accept unfair treatment without fighting back. I miss him every day." "I wish I could have met him," Wesley said quietly. "He sounds like a good man," he was, "and he would have liked you, I think." He always said the measure of a man was how he treated people who could not benefit him, and you have been nothing but kind to me from the moment we met, even though I brought nothing to this marriage but trouble." "That is not true," Wesley said, moving closer to her now. "You brought yourself, and that is more than enough. Natalie, these past few weeks with you have been the happiest I can remember. I know we married for practical reasons, but somewhere along the way it became real for me. You are not just my wife on paper anymore. You are the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing I think about before I sleep. I am falling in love with you, and I needed you to know that, even if it is too soon to say." Natalie's heart felt like it might burst from her chest. She had been feeling the same way but had not dared to hope that Wesley felt it too, that this marriage of convenience might be turning into something deeper and more lasting. "It is not too soon," she whispered, "because I am falling in love with you too." The space between them vanished as Wesley pulled her into his arms, and this time when he kissed her, it was not gentle or brief. It was passionate and deep, full of all the longing they had both been holding back, and Natalie responded with equal fervor, her arms winding around his neck as she pressed herself against him. They kissed until they were both breathless, only breaking apart when the need for air became desperate. "Come to bed with me," Wesley said, his voice rough with desire. "Not because you feel obligated, but because you want to, because this is real between us." "Yes," Natalie said without hesitation. "Yes, I want that." They made their way back to the house hand in hand, barely making it to the bedroom before coming together again. The evening dissolved into a tangle of clothes and whispered endearments, the awkwardness of first intimacy tempered by genuine affection and growing love. Wesley was careful with her, constantly checking that she was comfortable, and Natalie marveled at the tenderness of his touch contrasted with the strength of his body. Afterwards they lay tangled together in his bed, their bed now, talking softly about everything and nothing. Natalie traced lazy patterns on Wesley's chest while he played with her hair, both of them reluctant to break the spell of closeness. "I want you to know," Wesley said eventually, "that I meant what I said that first day. Now you are staying forever. I am never letting you go." "Good," Natalie said, propping herself up to look at him. "Because I am not going anywhere. This is my home now, and you are my family. We are in this together for better or worse, just like we promised." The weeks turned into months, and their love continued to deepen and grow. By the time winter arrived, blanketing the ranch in snow and forcing them to spend more time inside together, Natalie could not imagine her life without Wesley in it. They had found a rhythm that worked for both of them, with Natalie maintaining her shop in town, but spending most of her time at the ranch, which she had made truly beautiful with curtains and decorations, and all the small touches that turned a house into a home. Cornelius Grayson had not given up his vendetta, but his power was waning as more and more townspeople grew tired of his manipulation. The town council election in November brought in several new members who were not beholden to Grayson's money, and one of their first acts was to repeal the ordinance that had almost forced Natalie from town. She had stood in the council chambers when the vote was taken, Wesley's hand firmly clasped in hers, and felt a profound sense of justice when the ordinance was struck down by a margin of 6-1. Christmas came, and Wesley surprised her with a beautifully crafted sewing table he had built himself in secret, working in the barn during the hours when she was in town. She gave him a warm coat she had made, lined with soft wool and embroidered with his initials, and watched with delight as he tried it on and declared it the finest garment he had ever owned. As the new year of 1879 arrived, they celebrated quietly at the ranch, just the two of them and a bottle of wine Wesley had been saving for a special occasion. They toasted to the future and to each other, and when Wesley pulled her into his arms at midnight, Natalie felt a deep contentment settle over her. This was where she belonged, with this man who had risked everything to give her a chance at happiness. Spring brought new life to the ranch as calves were born and the grass turned green again. Natalie discovered she was pregnant in late March, the realization hitting her when she missed her monthly courses for the second time and felt an unfamiliar queasiness in the mornings. She was both terrified and thrilled, unsure how to tell Wesley, but knowing she could not keep such momentous news to herself. She chose a quiet evening when they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, the peaceful end to a long day of work. "Wesley, I have something to tell you and I am not sure how you are going to react." He turned to look at her with immediate concern. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am fine, more than fine. Wesley, I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a smile broke across his face, so wide and genuine that it transformed him. "Truly, we are going to be parents." "Yes, truly. Probably sometime in late October or early November, based on my calculations." Wesley let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around on the porch until she laughed and begged him to stop before she got dizzy. He set her down carefully, his hands immediately going to her still flat stomach with a sense of wonder. "I cannot believe it," he said softly. "A baby, our baby. Natalie, this is the best news you could have given me. You are happy then. I was worried it might be too soon, that we have not been married even a year yet." "Too soon? No, this is perfect. Everything about us has been unexpected and unconventional, so why should starting our family be any different?" He kissed her then, soft and sweet, before pulling back with a more serious expression. "You are going to need to take it easier, though. No more lifting heavy things, and I want you to see the doctor in town to make sure everything is progressing as it should." "I will," Natalie promised. "But Wesley, I am pregnant, not fragile. I can still work and take care of the house." "I know you can, but indulge me a little, all right? I have never been a father before, and I am going to be overprotective until I get used to the idea." She laughed and agreed, touched by his concern even as she rolled her eyes at his hovering. True to his word, Wesley became impossibly protective over the next few months, constantly asking if she needed anything and trying to take over tasks he deemed too strenuous for her condition. Natalie bore it with good humor, knowing it came from a place of love, and focused on preparing for the baby's arrival. She turned the small third bedroom into a nursery, sewing tiny clothes and blankets in every spare moment she had. The women of Durango, many of whom had become genuine friends over the past year, threw her a party at the church and showered her with gifts and advice. Even Cornelius Grayson seemed to have accepted defeat, retreating to his ranch and no longer making appearances in town to cause trouble. The baby came on a cold November night, arriving 3 weeks earlier than expected and sending Wesley into a panic as he rode to town to fetch the doctor and midwife. Natalie labored through the night with the calm, capable assistance of Mrs. Henshaw, who had experience delivering babies and had insisted on being present. By the time Wesley returned with the doctor, it was nearly over, and 15 minutes later he was holding his son, a red-faced, squalling bundle that nevertheless seemed like the most perfect thing either of them had ever seen. They named him William Porter Bryant, honoring both Wesley's father and Natalie's father with his names. He had Wesley's dark hair and Natalie's green eyes, and from the moment he entered the world, he made his presence known with healthy lungs and a demanding temperament. The first few months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Wesley was a devoted father, getting up in the night to help with feedings and changing diapers without complaint, marveling at every small development as their son grew and changed. Natalie had never seen him happier than when he was holding William, talking to him in a soft voice about the ranch and the animals and all the things they would do together when he was older. Spring came again, bringing with it William's first smile and his first attempts at sitting up. Natalie had reduced her work at the shop to just 1 day a week, training a young woman named Clara to take over most of the daily operations while she focused on being a mother. It was the right decision for their family, though she still enjoyed her days in town, the chance to exercise her skills and socialize with the other women. Life settled into a comfortable pattern over the next few years. William grew from baby to toddler to a rambunctious boy who idolized his father and followed him everywhere, desperate to help with the ranch work even when he was far too small to be of any real assistance. Wesley taught him to ride when he was 4, setting him on the gentlest horse they owned and leading him around the paddock while Natalie watched with her heart in her throat, terrified and proud in equal measure. When William was 5, Natalie discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news was less of a surprise and no less joyful, and Wesley's reaction was just as enthusiastic as it had been the first time. Their daughter was born in the summer of 1884, a calm, peaceful baby they named Margaret Louise Bryant, called Maggie by everyone who knew her. She had Natalie's blonde hair and Wesley's gray-blue eyes, and from the start she was different from her brother, content to sit and observe while William ran circles around her. The years continued to pass, marked by the ordinary milestones of family life. William started school in town, riding in with Natalie on her work days and staying with Mrs. Henshaw until it was time to go home. Maggie grew into a thoughtful, artistic child who loved to watch her mother sew and eventually learned to create her own simple stitches. The ranch prospered under Wesley's careful management, growing to over 1,000 acres and several hundred head of cattle. Cornelius Grayson died in 1887, and while nobody exactly mourned his passing, there was a sense of an era ending. His son, who took over the family businesses, was a more reasonable man who had no interest in the feuds his father had pursued, and he even came to Wesley with an offer to buy some cattle, which Wesley accepted with grave courtesy. Natalie eventually sold her shop building to Clara, who had proven herself more than capable of running the business. She kept her hand in by taking special commissions from home, but her focus now was entirely on her family and the ranch. She had never imagined when she married Wesley in desperation that she would end up here, completely and utterly happy in a life she had built with a man she loved more than she had thought possible. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Wesley took her back to Durango for dinner at the hotel restaurant, the same place where they had shared their first meal as husband and wife. The town had grown considerably in the decades since their hasty marriage, with new buildings and businesses springing up as Colorado continued to develop. But the restaurant looked much the same, and they sat at the same table by the window, holding hands across the white tablecloth just as they had that first day. "You remember what I said to you when we left the marshal's office?" Wesley asked, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "You said, 'Now you are staying forever,'" Natalie replied with a smile. It sounded like both a promise and a command. "It was both," Wesley confirmed, "and I have never regretted it for a single moment. Marrying you was the best decision I ever made, even if it was completely insane at the time." "It was insane," Natalie agreed, "but it was also exactly what we both needed. You gave me a home and a family and a love I did not know was possible. You saved me, Wesley, and then you spent 10 years showing me that I had saved you too." "You did save me," Wesley said seriously. "I was so lonely before you came into my life. The ranch was just a place I worked, not a home. You changed everything, made it all mean something. I love you, Natalie Bryant, more now than I did on the day we married, and I will love you forever." "Forever," Natalie echoed, leaning across the table to kiss him. "That is the deal we made, and I have never been happier to keep a promise." They finished their dinner in the warm glow of shared memory and enduring love. Two people who had come together in the strangest of circumstances and built something beautiful from it. When they returned to the ranch that night, William and Maggie were asleep in their beds, watched over by Mrs. Henshaw, who had agreed to stay with them for the evening. Wesley and Natalie stood in the doorway of each child's room, looking at the peaceful sleeping faces of the family they had created together. Later, lying in bed with Natalie curled against his side, Wesley found himself thinking about that day 10 years ago when he had walked into the bank and changed both their lives forever. It had been an act of desperation and courage, a leap of faith that could have ended in disaster. Instead, it had ended in this, a life full of love and purpose and meaning. "What are you thinking about?" Natalie murmured sleepily. "Just about how lucky I am," Wesley replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "How lucky we both are." "Very lucky," she agreed. "Though I think we also made our own luck. We chose to make this work, chose to open our hearts to each other even when it was scary. That counts for something." "It counts for everything," Wesley said. The years continued to roll forward, bringing new challenges and new joys. William grew into a strong, capable young man who loved ranching as much as his father did, and showed every sign of taking over the operation one day. Maggie discovered a talent for drawing and painting, creating beautiful artwork that Natalie had framed and hung throughout the house. They added 2 more children to their family, another boy named Thomas, and then finally another girl they called Sarah. And the house that had once seemed so large and empty was now constantly full of noise and activity and life. Through it all, Wesley and Natalie's love remained the foundation on which everything else was built. They still talked for hours in the evenings after the children were in bed, still reached for each other in the night, still found ways to surprise and delight each other after years of marriage. They had their disagreements, of course, moments of frustration and anger that came with the territory of sharing a life. But they had learned how to fight fair and forgive quickly, to never let the sun set on their anger, to remember that they were on the same team even when they disagreed about the details. When Durango celebrated Colorado's statehood anniversary in 1901, Wesley and Natalie attended the festivities with their 4 children, now ranging from young adult to teenager. They watched the parade and the speeches, ate ice cream and watched fireworks, and Natalie marveled at how much had changed since that desperate day in 1878 when she had been given 1 week to leave town. She caught Wesley watching her, and when their eyes met he smiled, that special smile he reserved just for her. He did not need to say anything, she could read it all in his expression. The love, the contentment, the quiet pride in the life they had built together. She smiled back, her heart full to bursting with affection for this man who had been brave enough to offer her salvation and wise enough to let it grow into something real. As the sun set on the celebration, painting the Colorado sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, the Bryant family made their way back to their wagon for the ride home. William helped his younger siblings up while Wesley handed Natalie onto the seat beside him, his touch as gentle and reverent as it had been on their wedding day all those years ago. The ride home was peaceful, with Thomas and Sarah dozing against Maggie while William rode his own horse alongside the wagon. The mountains rose dark against the star-filled sky, and the air carried the scent of pine and sage that Natalie had come to associate with home. Wesley's hand found hers on the seat between them, and she laced their fingers together, feeling the calluses that came from a lifetime of hard work, the strength that had always been tempered with tenderness. "Happy?" Wesley asked softly, not wanting to disturb the children. "So happy," Natalie confirmed. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life, that I get to spend every day with you, raising our children, building something that will last beyond both of us. I know exactly what you mean. There are still mornings when I wake up and see you beside me, and I have to remind myself that it is real, that you actually chose to stay with me. You gave me very little choice," Natalie teased gently. "You married me and told me I was staying forever, remember?" "Best decision I ever made," Wesley said firmly. "Marrying you that day, not giving you time to think about all the reasons it might not work. If I had waited, tried to court you properly, you might have talked yourself out of it." "I do not think so," Natalie said thoughtfully. "I think we would have found our way to each other eventually. Maybe not as quickly, but I believe some things are meant to be. We were meant to be." They reached the ranch house, warm lights spilling from the windows in welcome. Wesley helped everyone down from the wagon and saw to the horses while Natalie got the younger children ready for bed. By the time he came inside, the house was quiet again, and he found Natalie on the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the cool night air. He settled beside her on the bench they had placed there years ago, pulling her against his side. They sat in comfortable silence, looking out at the land they had worked together to build into something prosperous and beautiful. In the distance, cattle lowed softly, and somewhere an owl called out into the darkness. "You ever wonder what would have happened if Grayson had not tried to force you out?" Wesley asked. "If you had just continued with your shop and I had continued being too afraid to approach you?" "Sometimes," Natalie admitted, "but I try not to dwell on it. We cannot change the past, and honestly, I would not want to. Yes, what Grayson did was terrible and unjust, but it also pushed us together in a way that might never have happened otherwise. It forced us both to be brave, to take a chance on something uncertain, and look what came of it." She gestured at the ranch spread out before them, at the house full of sleeping children, at the life they had created from that desperate beginning. "All of this came from that one terrible day. Our entire family, our happiness, everything we have built together. I cannot regret the circumstances when they led to this." "I love the way you see the world," Wesley said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Always finding the good in things, always looking forward instead of back. It is one of the 1,000 reasons I love you." "Only 1,000, Natalie teased. "I would have thought after 23 years of marriage you could come up with more than that." "Give me time," Wesley laughed. "I am working my way up to 1,000,000. They sat together until the night grew too cold to remain outside comfortably, then made their way to bed, still hand in hand as they had been since the day they married. As they settled together under the quilts, Natalie's head on Wesley's shoulder, she thought about the girl she had been all those years ago, terrified and desperate and alone. That girl could never have imagined this future, could never have dreamed that her darkest moment would lead to such profound happiness. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Wesley's voice was already drowsy, relaxed in the way he only was when she was beside him. "For being brave enough to walk into that bank and offer me a way out, for keeping your promise that I could stay forever, for loving me exactly as I am." "You never have to thank me for that," Wesley said, his arm tightening around her. "Loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done. It is everything else that takes work." Natalie laughed softly and pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "I love you too, Wesley Bryant, now and always." "Now and always," he echoed, and within minutes his breathing had evened out into sleep. Natalie lay awake a little longer, listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling around them, the soft snores of her husband, the occasional creak from one of the children's rooms as they shifted in sleep. This was her life, built from nothing but determination and love and the willingness of two people to take a chance on each other. It was not the life she had planned or expected, but it was infinitely better than anything she could have imagined. The years continued their steady march forward. William married a sweet girl from town named Elizabeth and brought her to live at the ranch, where she quickly proved herself invaluable in helping manage the growing operation. Maggie went to Denver to study art formally, though she came home for long visits and eventually settled back in Durango, where she opened a small gallery that showcased not just her own work, but that of other local artists. Thomas took after his father in his love of ranching and his quiet, steady nature, working alongside William to expand the cattle operation. Sarah, the baby of the family, surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, opening a small school on the ranch property that served not just the Bryant children and grandchildren, but the families of their ranch hands and neighbors. Wesley and Natalie grew older together, their hair turning gray and their bodies slowing down, but their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened with age, refined by decades of shared experience and mutual support. They became grandparents and then great-grandparents, watching with pride as the family they had started grew and flourished. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1928, the family threw a huge celebration at the ranch, with children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filling every corner of the property. There was music and dancing and so much food that the tables groaned under the weight of it all. Wesley and Natalie, both now in their 70s but still healthy and active, presided over it all with quiet joy. As the sun began to set, William called for everyone's attention, and the crowd fell silent. 50 years ago today, he began, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled family. Our parents did something that most people thought was crazy. They got married after knowing each other for less than a day, just to keep our mother from being forced out of town by an unjust law. Most people expected it to end in disaster. Instead, it became the greatest love story I have ever known. He paused, his eyes finding his parents where they sat together, Wesley's arm around Natalie's shoulders in that familiar protective gesture. They showed all of us what it means to choose love every single day, to work through the hard times and celebrate the good ones, to build something lasting and true. Everything we have, everyone here today, exists because of that choice they made 50 years ago. So please join me in honoring Wesley and Natalie Bryant, who taught us all what forever really means. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers, and Natalie found tears streaming down her face as she looked around at the sea of beloved faces, all of them here because she and Wesley had been brave enough to take a chance on each other. Wesley pulled her closer, and she could see that his eyes were wet too, overwhelmed by the tangible evidence of the life they had created together. Later that night, after all the guests had departed or been settled in guest rooms and makeshift beds throughout the house, Wesley and Natalie found themselves alone on the porch once again, just as they had been so many times over the years. The night was warm and pleasant, full of the sounds of summer insects and the distant murmur of the creek. 50 years, Natalie said wonderingly. How did that happen so quickly? I have no idea, Wesley admitted. It feels like just yesterday I was walking into that bank, terrified that you would turn me down and I would lose my chance. I almost did, you know, Natalie said. For about 5 seconds, I thought you had completely lost your mind and I should run away as fast as I could. What changed your mind? Natalie thought about it, trying to remember the exact moment when she had decided to trust him. "Your eyes, I think. You looked at me like I was something precious and worth fighting for." Nobody had looked at me like that in a long time, and I thought that if nothing else, a man who could look at a stranger that way might be worth taking a chance on. "Best chance I ever took," Wesley said, echoing words he had said countless times over the years. "Marrying you, building this life with you, it is everything I never knew I wanted. You made me better, Natalie. You made me the man I always wanted to be." "We made each other better," Natalie corrected gently. "That is what love does when it is real and true. It does not complete you like some fairy tale. It challenges you to grow into the best version of yourself." They sat in comfortable silence, both lost in their own memories of the 5 decades they had spent together. Finally, as the night grew late, Wesley stood and offered Natalie his hand, pulling her to her feet with the same courtly gesture he had used since their wedding day. "Come to bed, wife," he said softly. "We have a lot more anniversaries to celebrate, and I want to be well rested for all of them." Natalie laughed and let him lead her inside, through the house that held so many memories, to the bedroom they had shared for 50 years. They prepared for bed with the comfortable efficiency of long practice, and when they finally lay down together, Natalie curled into Wesley's side exactly as she had on their wedding night all those years ago. "Wesley," she said into the darkness. "Yes, love. Thank you for not giving me a choice about staying. Thank you for being so certain, so brave, so willing to fight for something you believed in. Thank you for giving me forever." "Thank you for saying yes," Wesley replied, "for trusting me when you had no reason to, for building this beautiful life with me, for being my forever." They fell asleep like that, two people who had started as strangers and become soulmates, who had turned a desperate beginning into a love that would echo through generations. And if somewhere in the darkness Wesley whispered one more time, "Now you are staying forever," well, Natalie could only smile and hold him closer, because forever was exactly what they had built together, one day at a time, for 50 years and counting. The seasons continued to change, bringing with them the natural cycle of life. Wesley passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, with Natalie beside him holding his hand and whispering that she loved him. She mourned deeply but without regret, knowing that they had been given more time and more happiness than most people dared to dream of. Natalie lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still sharp and engaged with life even as her body grew frail. She spent her final days in the house Wesley had brought her to as a terrified young bride, looking out at the mountains she had come to love and remembering the man who had saved her, and then spent his life proving that she had saved him right back. When she died, she was buried beside Wesley on a hillside overlooking the ranch, under a tree they had planted together on their 10th anniversary. The headstone was simple, bearing both their names and dates, and underneath, the words that had defined their marriage from the very beginning. "Now you are staying forever." The Bryant Ranch continued under the management of their descendants, a testament to what two people could build when they chose to trust each other, to work together, to love fiercely and completely. And though the original story of how Wesley and Natalie met became family legend, growing slightly more embellished with each retelling, the core truth remained unchanged. On a desperate day in September 1878, a woman was given 1 week to leave town. A cowboy married her that same day and said she was staying forever. And from that improbable beginning, they created a love story that would endure through generations. A reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the moments when we are brave enough to take a chance on something impossible. Their great-great-grandchildren still work the land that Wesley built and Natalie made a home, still tell the story of their whirlwind marriage and the love that grew from it. The seamstress shop Natalie once owned is now a historical site, preserved by the town as a reminder of the woman who refused to be driven away and the man who gave her the means to stay. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the Colorado sun sets over the mountains, if you listen carefully to the wind moving through the valley, you can almost hear it whispering the words that changed two lives and created a legacy. Now you are staying forever.